You may have already heard the idea of slope or have already talked about it in another class. We're going to look at it as also the average rate of change. And it's represented by our slope formulas. And there's a couple of different ways that you can think about slope. Many of you might have heard of rise over run. Rise are your y values going up and down. Run to the left and right are the change in your x's. The delta y over delta x is also the same as saying the difference in your y's over the difference in your x's. And this all just means slope. x1, y1 is your first point, x2, y2 your second point. The units of average rate of change will be the units of your y's over the units of your x's. And usually our units on our x's will be some sort of time unit. In other words, years, days, months. So we'll be saying something per hour or something per year. Our unit on the bottom is going to be some sort of usually time unit. If the slope of the line connecting the 2 points is positive, so let's think about a picture of a line that has a positive slope, it'll be going uphill. All right, then our output increases as the input increases. If the slope is negative, that means our line is going downhill from left to right, going downhill. Then our output decreases as the input increases. And for a zero slope, we will see a line that is horizontal. So horizontal lines have slope 0, and our output will be constant for all of our input values. So for example 10, we're going to look at this as finding 2 points and then finding the slope or the average rate of change. So our first point, football player runs 1,056 yards in the year 2006. Remember when we said we're going to come up with points, our x value will be represented by a time unit. 2006 for the yards, 1,056. So this is years, this is yards. Our second point, same thing. The years, 2010, and the yards, 978. So our slope, or our average rate of change, is going to be represented by the slope formula. So we're going to call our first point x1, y1, our second point x2, y2, and then use the formula above. Y sub 2 minus y sub 1 divided by x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So compute the numerator. You should get negative 78 over, and then compute the denominator, 4. Remember, our y values on top were in yards, and our value on the bottom was represented by our years. So right now it's saying that it's negative 78 yards for every 4 years. When we talk about an average rate of change, we want to know for every 1 year. So we're going to be doing the division, and notice it says round to 1 decimal place, which means we don't want it as a fraction, we want it as a decimal. So with your calculator, type in negative 78 divided by 4, and you'll come up with negative 19.5, and then the unit label is going to be yards per year. So what this means, and then the sentence that's going to interpret this is, on average, and we usually start out with this when we talk about average rate of change, on average, because it's not every single year that he's going to lose 19.5 yards, but just on average over that 4-year period, it's going to be about 19.5 yards each year. So on average, we got to say what years we're looking at, between 2006 and 2010, because maybe in 2011 he got way better, but between these 4 years, he didn't do so good. And because it's negative, we're going to say he lost. If it were positive, we'd say he gained, but he lost in this case 19.4 or 19.5 yards each year. Not not all 4 years, not every 4 years, but just each year between these 4 years, he lost about 19.5 yards. That's our interpretation.